Hello, and welcome to another episode of Goblin Games. This episode we are talking about a specific card and mashing it up with a seemingly unrelated topic that was procured from a game of Wikipedia roulette. We hope you enjoy it. If you do, please consider subscribing to our Patreon account, which you can find at patreon.com/goblinlorepod. Any contribution helps. We are just trying to make this a cost-neutral podcast so we can keep giving you all of the fun, goofy, weird, but, important content that connects the Magic the Gathering world to your day-to-day life. So without any further ado, let's get to the show. Hello, Podwalkers, and welcome to another episode of Goblin Lore. This episode, we are featuring another goofy Goblin Games. And I tried to think of more G's to put in there to alliterate, and it didn't work. But that's kind of the tone and tenor that we go for with the Goblin Games episodes. This is going to be a fast, I guess not fast necessarily, but a bit more abbreviated, quick-hitting, condensed, more nonsensical probably episode than usual. And I am joined, as always, by one of my co-hosts.
Hello, I'm Alex, found on Twitter at AlexanderNewM. Happy to be here. You kicked off the inaugural Goblin Games. I'm happy to be part of the sequel, I guess.
Goblin Games 2 Electric Boogaloo?
Yeah, that's better than Goblin Games 2 First Blood Part 3 or something. I don't know how those numbers work for that series, but that's
Seems
not
about
what
right.
we're here to talk about. We're here to focus on like one particular card and then a story from history. And I think because I kind of was going to talk about the card, and I think that's probably the better way to open this, so I'll start. So we're going to talk about the card Swords to Plowshares. This is a card from Alpha. For people who don't play Legacy or Commander, or weren't playing in 1994 or 3 when Alpha came out, Swords to Plowshares is a white instant. It removes a creature from the game, and then that creature's controller gains life equal to its power. Now, that is some old terminology, and there's a reason I used it. Today, it would say exile target creature. Back then, Exile Zone didn't exist. So literally, this card made that creature no longer part of the game. It is gone. Which really kind of fits the flavor of what's going on here. This name, Swords to Plowshares, goes back to a verse from the Bible, from the book of Isaiah in fairly early, apparently chapter 2, verse 4. It said, "And he shall judge among the nations and shall rebuke many people. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nations shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore." And so Alpha really was about Richard Garfield trying to capture the flavor of a thing into a single card. He didn't build there was a few little like 2-card pairs or things, but he didn't build a whole set this way like we do like Wizards does these days. But what he was doing is trying to take a single card and capture the essence of a thing. And so taking the essence of this concept of Swords to Plowshares, of soldiers turned into farmers, of people who are no longer making war but are at peace times. So like literally in the art we see just a farmer. And I love the flavor of this card because I think it really captures that. Like literally this creature is removed from the battlefield. He is no longer at war. But now that this creature is farming, this creature's power generates food, generates life for the creature's controller. So it is still creating some value in that sense in a mechanical way. But I don't know, I really, especially I started playing in 1994 with Revised, and so this was a card that the flavor of it always really caught me.
Yeah, it is really cool. It's one of those cards we've talked in the past on the show about how, especially in older Magic, there are a lot of references in flavor text to like the Bible and certain books of the Bible specifically. But this is a card that is the whole concept is pulled from the Bible, and that's really interesting to me. But yeah, like you said, it does completely encapsulate that flavor, and I love the art too. The original art is pretty cool. I actually don't have it up in front of me right now, but who is the artist on that one?
Jeff Menges.
Jeff Menges.
Pronounces his last name. And a funny thing too, like you were saying, a lot of Bible verses or old philosophers or historians and things would be real world sources would be quoted for flavor text. In this case, even though the name specifically evokes one of those sources, they didn't actually have room on the card, so there is no flavor text. Part of that
isn't that funny?
I realized I was reading a fifth edition version of their fourth edition version of the card. The alpha version is, I think, even better because it has some extra explanation, because back in the day people didn't understand the rules as much, so the cards kind of over explain things. Target creatures removed from game entirely. Return to owner's deck only when the game is over. Creature's controller gains life points equal to the creature's power. But I love that they had to specify that it goes back to the deck when the game is over.
That is pretty incredible. Yeah, I like that a lot. Well, and I'm just clicking through, a bunch of these. There are a couple of different versions of the art too, as I'm looking at it.
There's some gorgeous art. There's some Foglio art.
There's some Foglio art. There's some Therese Nielsen art. There's some incredible stuff here. It's beautiful work.
The one of my favorites probably is the Judge promo from Sam Wolfe Connolly did the art. There's a person holding a sword back and then like a little stop motion thing or something, and then in the last part of it they're holding a backhoe.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
Love that art.
Well, and so art might be one of the best ways for me to sort of transition into the real world topic that we're mashing with this. And so quite honestly, this idea came to me because I was listening to another podcast. Shout out to the Dilettante Ball podcast with Johnny O'Mara and Spencer. I don't remember his last name now, but really good podcast. It's really fun. They literally go onto Wikipedia, click random article, and then they'll talk about that random article. And one of the recent episodes that I was listening to, the Wikipedia article they found was for the U.S.S. Milwaukee in 1864, a battleship essentially that was built during the Civil War. And it caught my attention, first of all, because I am from Milwaukee. So I was like, that's interesting. That's kind of cool. But as they were talking about it and reading through this, the Milwaukee was sunk in 1865. It was destroyed. And then in 1868, the wreck was raised and broken up for scrap that was used for the construction of the Eads Bridge across the Mississippi River in St. Louis. And I thought that was super fascinating. And that's sort of how we tie this into Swords to Plowshares, is you have this weapon of war. That's what a battleship is, a construct used for killing. And when the war was done, everything was over, they took it and repurposed that metal for a civil work, for something more peaceful. And literally in this instance, instead of something destroying something like a battleship or an armament would, this is a bridge reaching across a body of water to connect the sides. And I think that's a really cool and poetic idea and image. And in addition to that, there are plenty of other examples where, small firearms and other sorts of things have been, melted down to slag in the past and used for art pieces. One of the biggest examples of this is in Australia in the past decade, when they collected a lot of weapons, a lot of firearms. Maybe it was longer than a decade ago. I don't remember. But and a lot of them were melted down and turned into a civil works art piece. I believe in downtown Melbourne or Sydney, one of the major cities over there. There's another example that the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department in 2014 collected a bunch of knives, guns, rifles, pistols, revolvers, melted them down, and turned them into steel rebar that then was given to the Highway Trust Fund and other, government departments so that they could use these weapons essentially as something constructive and peaceful and, again, something to better the community rather than to destroy it. And so that's sort of what we have in Swords to Plowshares as well, is this conversion from violence to benefit. I think that's a really beautiful concept that we can actually see, reflected in the world around us at large.
Yeah, I love that relation. That's a really cool way to kind of use a real world examples to bring some of that flavor to the real world. And it's a thing like I never heard of that. Like there's so many just little stories and small things that exist that you just don't hear about because there's so many. But it's fun to get those, and I'm glad you brought that to share.
Yeah, and I just want to make a note of a couple more things here. And quite honestly, these come from somewhat cursory Google searches. I'm sure that our listeners, if you want to dig deep into this, there is a wealth of stuff out there. But there's an article that I found from theguardian.com where they talk about melting arms into quote, weapons of mass attraction. And sculptor Gonzalo Mabunda recycles weapons from Mozambique's 16 years civil war. Mozambique is in Africa. So he twists and melts AK-47s, rocket launchers, and pistols into anthropomorphic, humanoid-ish forms, and basically creates almost like lawn ornaments out of these former, weapons. He completely repurposes them. He'll make chairs out of the pieces of these guns. He's made a guitar out of them. I mean, taking all this stuff, shovels, taking all these and repurposing them literally into a plow. A shovel essentially, is another farming sort of tool. This is just cool stuff to me. You can see on there too in this article, he has made musical instruments like the guitar. He's made violins for people. He has made what is it called, a xylophone. Just outstanding, fantastic stuff, and actually works with blacksmiths from Africa on some of this as well. And this article mentions other artists. It's just that very cool thing to me of taking something that can be violent and turning it into beauty. Bloodshed into beauty is that's what we try to do verbally, but man, people are out there doing it in real life. That wasn't hokey. Don't you giggle at me.
We've verbally turned violent bloodshed into beauty. I like it. There's also some good alliteration going on in there. I am, after all, an avid ally of alliteration.
That's our show. You can find the podcast on Twitter at GoblinLorePod, or you can email us any questions, comments, or concerns at goblinlorepodcast@gmail.com. This episode was written, produced by Joe Redeman, who you can find on Twitter at Findhorn. That's Fynd Horn. It was also written and produced by Alex Newman, who you can find on Twitter at AlexanderNewM. Music comes to us courtesy of an original composition by Wintergatten, who you can find at wintergatten.com. That's winter, GATAN.com. Thank you all for listening, and remember, goblins, like snowflakes, are only dangerous in numbers.